Chapter 23 Tsolenka Pass. Henry was wrapped in his wool blanket, snuggling into its warmth. He was drifting into another dreamless sleep when a hand shook him awake. A handsome elven face looked down at him and smiled. Henry sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Gostamir?" Henry asked in awe. "Hello, Alan," Gostamir said. Henry chuckled. It's Henry, actually." "Of course it is," said Gostamir, putting his fists on his hips. Gostamir walked around Henry, snowflakes drifting down on his long blonde hair as he extended his hands and spoke. The scene was so surreal that Henry wondered if it was a dream. He was still in the fane. Irina and Rowen slept in their bedrolls, but Navara walked beside her patron. She was beaming. "I'm so glad you're finally talking to my friends," Navara said to Gostamir. "Is this your horse, Alan?" Gostamir asked, walking up to Snowflake. Henry stood, feeling a renewed energy brought on only by curiosity. He had never seen an archfey and could not stop staring. Yes, he is," Henry said, not caring if the fey got his name wrong. "Snowflake is a great steed, a full-blooded destrier. He was hurt badly on our way here, though. I'm sure Navara told you about what happened to Juniper." Gostamir sighed. "She did. Sadly, I can't do anything about that. But I can help this one." He patted Snowflake's mane. Then he bent down and picked a small flower. "I can turn him into a fairy horse. Don't you want a fairy horse, or a unicorn?" "You can turn him into a unicorn?" "Oh no, he'll be nothing like a unicorn. He'll look just the same, but he'll be a fey." Gostamir twirled the flower in his fingers, and the blossom burst into shimmering dust. Then the fey took in a quick breath and sneezed, sending the dust fluttering onto Snowflake. "There, now you can dismiss him whenever you want, and he'll get sent right back to me in the Fey Wild." "Wow, really?" "Yes." "Herkomoid is a fey too. Watch this," Navara said, stepping out of the fane with Herkomoid on her shoulder. She held out her arm and flicked her wrist with one swift motion. Herkomoid vanished and appeared beside Gostamir. She flicked her hand again, and the pseudo-dragon reappeared on her shoulder. Herkomoid flapped his wings to adjust his balance. "That's amazing!" Henry shouted. "Isn't it?" Navara smiled. "Herkomoid is kind of like a wizard's familiar. Even if he dies here in the Shadowfell, I could cast a spell with a brazier and incense, and he would come back to me." Henry practiced dismissing and summoning Snowflake. The horse did not take it as well as the dragon, and spooked each time he reappeared. "He'll get the hang of it eventually," Gostamir said, as Navara nestled her head on his shoulder and leaned on him. "Is that Gostamir?" Irina sat up on her bedroll, blinking with sleepy eyes at the fey prince. This time it was Gostamir's turn to spook. He disappeared, causing Navara to topple over in the grass. The next day was spent resting, making holy water, and listening to Victor talk on and on about how he was going to leave Barovia and find a proper school where he could learn magic. "Although I might not be going anywhere if you lot keep hanging round. Strahd's goons are liable to nab me." Victor set a pile of dishes by a cracked basin in the kitchen on the first floor of the windmill. "Soon after the last time you all were here, some Vistani came and dug up whatever you buried in the woods. I don't know what game you're playing, but don't go burying things around me new home." He looked at the dirty dishes. "I don't want anyone finding out I've been feeding the Count's enemies." "Well, we'll get out of your hair by tomorrow morning," Henry said. "As for now, you need help cleaning up?" "Nah, I've a spell that can do that." Henry looked around at the debris still littering the kitchen floor from the fight with the hags 10 days ago. "Yeah, a cleaning spell would be useful." "So, the Count," Victor said, rolling back his slouched shoulders and straightening his gaunt frame. Since Vasily turns out to be the bloodsucker himself, that must mean Navara's available. He looked out the open door and watched the warlock's backside as she leaned on a tree stump, writing in her journal. God, I've missed that arse. Say, Henry, you think me and Navara... No, Henry said with a grin. Why not? Victor scowled. I'm sure we've got plenty in common. What's Navara like? Well, she likes people. Victor grimaced. Ew. She's really kind. I was nice to me mum once. And she's great with magic. There we go. We both love magic. It will totally work. She's dating someone else. What? Already? Yep. But that other elf over there... Henry pointed to Rowen, who was talking with Irina in the fane. She's free as a bird, or a cat, and she's great with magic too. Victor watched Rowen and began to nod. The scary one. Yeah, she's pretty bitchin'. He smiled and sauntered off toward the standing stones. Rowen and Irina turned when they saw Victor walk into the fane. Hi, Rowen, Victor said in a smarmy voice. He looked around at the monoliths. So, this is where you guys like to hang out now. Kinda weird. What do you want, Victor? Rowen could tell by his faux casual manner, and by the way he kept feeling the back of his greasy hair, that he wanted something. Navara and Henry might put up with this man-child, but she would not. I was thinking, he said, you and me, maybe we could, you know. Rowen glared at him, unamused. No, I don't know. Come on, Rowen, we could hang out, just you and me. Rowen's lip turned up. You shouldn't be asking grown-ups on dates. I'm 25, Victor said defensively. Rowen didn't care. Don't think I've forgotten what you did to your last girlfriend. Stella? That Voctor girl wanted me to polymorph her into a cat. I told her I hadn't mastered that spell yet, so no wonder it went wrong. He shuffled his feet and looked at the ground. I do feel kinda bad about that. I tried to help her, but I don't know any healing magic. He looked up at Rowen. But I promise I wouldn't try turning you into a cat. Rowen glared at him. So? He took a step closer. You want to go out with? A vicious wolf-like growl cut him off. Rowen bared her teeth and barked. Victor fled like a frightened dog with his tail between his legs. Over by the windmill, Henry doubled over laughing. Later that evening, after Henry had finished consecrating 4 vials of holy water, and after they had eaten some of their rations for dinner, none of them wanted more of Victor's cooking, Rowen took out a note from her pocket. Making sure the others were not looking, she unfolded the slip of parchment and read it again. Rowen, do not share this note with your friends. They do not understand your pain as I do. I see that you have great strength and potential. Know that I am considering you as an heir to the county of Barovia. When the curse is broken and I have ascended to my rightful throne, I will need a trustworthy successor to take my place as Vampir's champion. You could be that champion. You could succeed where your father failed. SVZ. Strahd had given it to her during their night at Ravenloft. She wondered if Strahd knew that Vampir was already calling her, tempting her. She quickly tucked the note away and bedded down for the night, both fearful and strangely excited to discover what visions or memories might haunt her dreams. She tried forcing herself to sleep, but was unable to quell the fluttering feeling in her stomach. After an hour of restless anticipation, she entered a nightmare yet again. 2 wolves were chasing a hind through the woods. Though she strained with every muscle in her body, still they gained. One of the wolves made a dive, and when it tumbled, it rose and transformed into the Lord of Barovia, Strahd von Zarovich himself. As he extended his arm, an earthen hand emerged from the forest floor. It grabbed the doe by her leg and brought her crashing to the ground. In elven form again, Sariel spat dry leaves from her mouth and scrambled to grab her staff. By now the second wolf was circling around to cut off her retreat. It too transformed, revealing itself to be Rahadin. The elf brushed a lock of dark hair from his face as he drew his sword. Strahd advanced on Sariel slowly and confidently. Grabbing the staff and springing to her feet, Sariel wheeled on her assailant. She tried to cast a spell against him, but the vampire dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Again she shouted an incantation, but another counterspell swallowed it up before the words could even leave her mouth. Strahd smiled. "You have been living on borrowed time, she-elf. What madness drove my brother to hide you from me? What pleasure could you promise him that I did not already provide in abundance?" Now the vampire was upon her. She swung her staff, but he caught it with both hands and snapped the sturdy pole like a dry twig. Sariel stumbled backward as Strahd continued walking toward her. "Nothing can hide from me in my domain," he said. Rahadin darted forward. With a flick of his sword he cut the tendon of Sariel's heel. The elf maiden yelped with pain and almost fell. Limping away, she tried to drive off her attackers with whatever magic she could summon, but to no avail. The two men were closing in, toying with her. Then, as if from nowhere, a streak of white hair and white-hot fury slammed into Strahd, bowling him over. There was Metis, roaring and tearing at the Count with both claws. Rowen, you need to get up now." Irina shook her awake, and Rowen screamed. Irina, who was crouched beside her, fell back. The druid looked around. She was in the fane. Henry and Navarra had their cloaks on, and bedrolls packed, ready to leave. Rowen apologized to Irina, and packed up her few belongings. They needed to head to the farthest western edge of Barovia to reach Yester Hill. When Rowen was ready, all four of them snapped their fingers and appeared in the bog fane in Berez. Navarra stood by the Luna River, trying to remember the correct incantation to walk across the water. They needed to get to the other side. "How can you just forget a spell?" Rowen said, pacing along the riverbank. The swamp grass made squelching noises under her feet. "I never had it memorized," Navarra said, waving her hands in various patterns. "I only just read it from the tome." After a long while, Henry came up to her. "How about we follow the Luna River to the south? There's bound to be a crossing somewhere." They all agreed, and Rowen transformed into a horse, allowing Navarra to ride her, while Henry and Irina rode Snowflake. They trudged for miles through the bog on trackless, soggy ground. Mud caked on Rowen's hooves, while gnats and mosquitoes buzzed in her eyes. Navarra tried swatting them off with an extra shirt from her pack, but her efforts only annoyed Rowen further. Once they had climbed out of the swamp and began to ascend a steep slope, the air grew cold and thin. Rowen snorted. They should have gone north. They could have reached the Svalich road and then crossed at the bridge west of Vallaki. She pinned her ears back at Henry, angry that she had listened to him. Navarra hopped off her back when the slope became a sheer cliff. High above them, at the top of the bluff, was a bridge spanning a large gully. The river had become more swift and more treacherous, the waters raging through the canyon more than 100 feet below. This bridge was the first crossing they had seen in 15 miles. They decided to climb up to it. Henry dismissed Snowflake with a wave of his hand. Rowen transformed into an elf and scowled. Why had Gostomir appeared to Henry and not to her? If Navarra's patron was so powerful, why hadn't he granted them all gifts? Rowen huffed as they began to scale the mountain. It must have been at least 500 feet to the top. "Can't you just fly us to the bridge?" Rowen asked Henry when they had ascended to a precarious ledge about a quarter of the way up. Henry, who was in the lead, looked back at her, breathing heavy. His armor clanked as he wiped the perspiration from his brow. "Seriously? Do you have any idea the magic needed to stay in flight, let alone carry someone?" Rowen bit her lip, regretting her words. She did have an idea. It was hard enough for her to fly as a small bat. The more powerful a spell, the more magic was needed, and the more exhausted a mage became when casting it. Rowen did not talk for the rest of the climb. When she made it to the top, she stood up and wiped the grime from her trousers. There was snow on the ground, and a light flurry was beginning to swirl in the wind. Rowen brushed her unruly hair from her face, and froze, looking out at the bridge, fear rising in her chest. Strahd von Zarovich was mounted on a black horse in the middle of the span. Rowen immediately raised her staff and assumed a fighting pose. "What's wrong?" Irina asked, coming up beside her. "There!" Rowen shouted. She kept her eyes on the Count. "Rowen," Navara said, putting a hand on her shoulder, "what do you see?" The other three were unfazed, even though Strahd was only 15 feet away. Rowen looked at her friends with concern, but when she looked again at the bridge, the image of Strahd was gone. I saw him! He was right there!" Rowen pointed. After some deliberating on whether the figure was Strahd in the flesh, or just an illusion to ward off travelers, they decided to cross the bridge anyway. A frigid wind bit at Rowen's exposed face, and the light snow became a heavy torrent that churned about her. She wrapped her cloak around herself as they walked across the icy bridge, but it brought little warmth to her shivering body. They made it to the other side of the bridge without Strahd accosting them, but as they trekked further along the snowy pass, Rowen thought she heard a voice in the distance. She stopped and squinted in the dim light. Her vision was obscured by the worsening blizzard. To her left, she was able to make out a sheer cliff that fell away into a bottomless chasm, and to her right, a precipice that soared into the white storm. They were walking on the edge of a mountain. She looked up toward the peak, trying to discern the noise above the howling wind. "Rowen, watch out!" Henry slammed her to the ground. Rowen's face planted, and she choked on a mouthful of snow. After a moment she coughed and shoved the knight off. She looked around, seeing nothing but her friends shaking in the snow. "What's wrong with you?" Rowen said to Henry, when there was no threat to be seen. "There was a giant goat." Henry pointed up the mountainside. "It was as big as a bull. It was going to ram right into you." But there was no goat, just like there was no Strahd. "This place gives me the creeps," Navara said, teeth chattering. "Night will be upon us soon," Irina said. "We should take refuge in that tower." She pointed a trembling finger to a crenellated stone watchtower jutting out from the cliffside. It stood alone and shed no light from its arrow slits. But they were lost, and none of them had the proper clothing for a night in the blizzard. After knocking on the tower door and hearing no reply, Irina picked the lock, and they entered, a small, empty octagonal room. Snow blew in, and they quickly shut the door. Henry drew Apollo, revealing a staircase to their right, and a bare fireplace on the far wall. They walked up the stairs to another empty room on the second floor. A ladder stood in the center of the room, extending to a trap door in the ceiling. They climbed the ladder to the rooftop, where the blizzard blasted all around, and they were greeted by a surprise. There, in the middle of the roof, sat a wooden box, a coffin. It looked like varnished mahogany, untouched by the elements. Even the snow seemed afraid of it. "Van Richten told us Strahd kept many coffins throughout Borovia," Rowen said. "Maybe we could burn it," Henry said. Navara stepped forward. "Or maybe we could just take the grave dirt from inside and scatter it to the four winds." But they were all wary of touching it. Whatever magic was keeping it preserved on the roof might harm them. Instead, they left it alone. "At least we know where one of his resting places is," Henry said, squinting through the snow. He began climbing back down the ladder when Irina screamed. Rowen put a hand on her shoulder and shouted through the howling wind, "What's wrong?" Irina looked around confused. "I saw ghosts," she said. "Women in armor. They were surrounding us." But there was nothing to be seen. All four friends came back to the ground floor. Wishful thinking made them conclude that the ghosts were only phantoms of their imagination. "There's magic in this place," Rowen said, rubbing her hands together. "I'm going to send Herkomoid to find Davian," Navara said, after writing a note in her journal. She tore out the page and fastened it to the dragon's leg. "We're lost, and we need warm clothes." None of them guessed at Herkomoid's chances of finding Davian, but the pseudo-dragon was intelligent, and if the snowstorm relented, he could fly above the trees. He might be able to find the winery. It was worth the risk. Navara kissed Herkomoid's scaly head, and he flew off into the tempest. Staying in the tower would keep them out of the wind, but it would not save them from the plummeting temperature. They scavenged a small bundle of sticks for a fire, but it wasn't enough to burn through the night. After they ate from their rations, Rowen transformed into a polar bear, and warmth immediately spread over her body. She, at least, would not freeze in the night. Irina, on the other hand, shook violently as she nestled into Rowen's fur. After taking off his armor, Henry lay down next to Irina on the other side. Rowen held them close, but felt awkward as the two humans pulled up their blankets and snuggled up to each other. As long as they don't start kissing, Rowen thought. Navara pulled her cloak around herself and paced the room, taking the first watch of the night. Just as the last embers of the fire were going out and Rowen was slipping into a light sleep, Navara gasped. There was a familiar sound of flickering flame, and Rowen opened her eyes. A circle of violet fire rose from the floor near the door. Henry and Irina stood up. After a few seconds, the flames were gone. Rowen looked around in the darkness, but saw only the black silhouettes of her friends. "Must have been another illusion," Henry said. "That was—" Rowen put a paw over Henry's mouth. She thought of the green fire in the coffin shop. An image of a large basin and an hourglass came to her mind. Green goes to where the coffins hide. Violet leads to the mountain spire. They were in the mountain spire. This was no illusion. Someone from Ravenloft was here with them in the tower. Rowen sat very still, not taking her paw from Henry's mouth. After a few heartbeats, the flame flickered to life again, and then it went out just as quickly as it had before. The intruder was gone. They slept restlessly through the night, unable to guess the reason why someone might have come here from the castle. They were preparing to leave in the morning when Rowen noticed that Henry was missing. "Where's Henry?" Rowen asked, her heart beginning to race. "I'm here," Henry said, walking down the stairs. "What were you doing up there?" Rowen eyed him. "Taking a leak, if you must know," he said. "And I found out why we were visited last night." He pulled out a folded note. "This was slipped into my pocket. It's a threat from the Count." "What does it say?" Navara asked. "That I'm a dead man." "Yes, but what are the details?" "That's exactly what it says. Here." He gave her the note and walked out the door with his pack and bedroll. Navara unfolded and read it, while Rowen peered over her shoulder. "You are a dead man. SVZ." "He gets straight to the point," Rowen said. She left the tower with Navara and Irina, stepping out into a soft world of snow. The storm had stopped, but a cold breeze nipped at her face. Unless they wanted to go back the way they had come, there was nowhere to go but under an old stone gateway that straddled the west road. "Oh, God!" Navara exclaimed. "How are we going to get past that?" Then she cast a spell and teleported to the other side of the gate. "I made it!" she shouted. Henry, nonchalantly, walked through the open arch and gave her a quizzical look. Navara looked back at the gateway and sighed.
"Oh, it's gone. I thought it looked like a portcullis was down, and it was glowing green."
"Another illusion," Rowen said, walking up to her.
"I'm tired of being toyed with. Does anyone else think there might be someone out there casting spells to make us see things?"
"I wouldn't put it past the old vampire," Henry said, as the four friends trudged up the snowy path.
"Where are we going, anyway?" Rowen asked, frustrated. "None of us knows where this road leads." "Heads up, Henry!" Navara shouted.
"What?" Henry turned around. Piff! A snowball hit him square in the face. Henry brushed it off. Then he bent down and scooped up a snowball of his own. Just as he was about to throw it at the warlock, piff! It smashed into Irina. Irina gasped at the cold.
"All right, Gibson," she said, "if that's how you want to play."
Irina took Rowan's staff and knocked it against a tree branch that was suspended above Henry's head. An avalanche of snow dumped on the night. The four friends burst into a melee of snowballs and laughter, and for a moment Rowan's spirits lifted. Suddenly, Navara stood still, looking up at the sky.
"Herkomoid!" she
shouted. The pseudo-dragon landed on his master's shoulder and nuzzled her chin. A second later, a raven lit on the ground before them and transformed.
"Davian!"
Navara shouted, with a large grin on her face. Davian raised an eyebrow at the snowballs in their hands, then pulled out the note Herkomoid had given him and read it aloud. "Cold, lost, and in danger." He glared back at them. Rowen dropped her snowball. Navara ran to the old man and hugged him, unashamed.
"I'm so glad Herkomoid found you."
"None of you should be here," he said. "Not even we were-ravens venture through the Tsolenka Pass. There is black magic here, and in the mountains beyond."
Davian handed each of them a thick fur coat.
"Fortunately, I know a shortcut back to the winery, but we'll need to follow the pass for a few miles."
"We came here trying to find you," Navara said. "Danica told us you needed our help."
"I'd much appreciate that," he said, "provided we can make it off this cursed mountain."
Enveloped in their new coats, they followed Davian down the trail. But before they had gone more than a mile, they saw a band of men coming up the pass toward them.
"It's the mountain folk," Davian said in a hushed voice. "Listen, they may be at war with the keepers, but they don't know who you are yet. Don't mention me, and you might avoid a fight."
Then he turned back into a raven and flew to a nearby tree. As soon as the bird was out of sight, 2 women and 4 men rounded a bend in the trail. They stopped when they saw Rowen, Henry, Irina, and Navara. They were covered in animal skins and wore many painted beads. At the head of the group was a muscular woman with a partly shaved head, and a long-bearded old man with a headdress made of deer antlers. All of them carried weapons. The woman menaced them with her spear.
"Who are you, and what are you doing in these mountains?"
But the old man put his hand on the shaft, and she lowered it. The man's pale eyes fixed on Rowen.
"You look like someone I once knew," the man said.
It was an odd statement, but one that Rowen had been longing to hear.
"We are strangers from beyond the valley," Rowen said.
"Forgive me," said the man. "I am Grugak the Wise, druid to the clan of Lake Luna. This is Malaswintha."
He gestured to the woman beside him.
"And these," he pointed to the others, "are the youngest warriors of our tribe."
"My name is Rowen, and these are my companions. Tell me, who was this person I remind you of?"
"She was a dusk elf," Grugak said.
"What was her name?"
"Sariel."
Cold air caught in Rowan's chest as she held her breath.
"Yes, Sariel was her name. She and her daughter lived with us as fugitives, Grugak said. I was only a small boy at the time, but I will never forget her. She taught me magic when no one else would. My people hid her from the eyes of the Lord of Barovia.
Rowen let out a breath. What happened to them? Sariel and her daughter?
They were found and killed. One of our villages was massacred for the crime of giving them sanctuary. Now our people know better than to defy the will of the Count. His wrath is irresistible. But that was many years ago.
Grugak eyed Rowen's 3 companions.
These are perilous mountains. You should be careful.
If it's so dangerous, why do you venture here? Rowen dared to ask.
Our warriors are preparing for their vision quest at the Amber Temple.
Where is this Amber Temple?
The woman Melaswintha stepped forward.
You don't need to know, she said, lifting her spear again.
It's all right, Grugak said to her,
though he kept his eyes on Rowen.
These strangers are just curious. If you want to know, Rowen, from beyond the valley, the Amber Temple is in the caverns of Mount Gakis. It is a place of great magic, but also of great danger. We go as far as the cave at the gate, but even our bravest never enter the temple itself.
A block of amber stone flashed in Rowen's mind, and she briefly saw the wisp of darkness stirring within it. The mountain folk went on their way, and Davian flew down from his perch. Together they followed the snowy path as it wound its way through the mountains. After 15 miles, Davian led them away from the pass and down a switchback trail that hugged the contours of a narrow draw. From there they followed a ridgeline through the forest until they reached a dirt road furrowed with wagon ruts. Finally, after another 2 hours of walking, the trees opened up to reveal the neatly ordered rows of the vineyard. Henry, Navara, and Irina gave a sigh of relief, but Rowen was quiet. Her thoughts kept returning to the Amber Temple. She needed to talk with Navara about her dreams tonight. When they made it to the winery, they were greeted by Stefania, who was the only one still awake. The travelers were all exhausted. Davian collapsed in a chair and fell asleep before even taking off his boots. Stefania helped the other women set about unpacking and arranging beds. But meanwhile, out of the corner of her eye, Rowen glimpsed Henry slipping out a door into the night.